Finding an immigrant ancestor's place of origin is the key to finding earlier generations of the family and accessing many family history resources in that home area. Unfortunately, tracing immigrant origins can be one of the hardest parts of doing family history research. Even if you know which country your family came from, it can still be hard to identify a specific hometown or birthplace. Another issue is that there are so many records to search. The best strategy in getting started is to check the immigration and travel collections on websites like Family Search and Ancestry and others, searching them directly rather than just doing a general search. Finding an immigration record is not usually the first step. You'll already have gathered clues from census records, from vital statistics, from other locality records here in the United States. And there are some gotchas. You'll need to be prepared to think about ethnic names. John can equal Jan or Janos or Johann or Giovanni. There are surname variants, phonetic spellings, and non-anglicized names, aliases, and name changes. Some immigrants changed their names to be more American, and some of those names were changed inadvertently when errors were made by those recording the information. Not only is the person's name a problem, place names are problems too. Sometimes place names were spelled phonetically. Names and borders changed almost overnight in some cases. You'll want to make sure that you know about how old your ancestor was when he or she came to this country. Know something about the family structure if you can. Obviously, you'll need to know a nationality, and an estimated date of arrival is very important. There are other things you'll need to watch for when you search immigration records as well. You'll want to look for stories of a chain migration where one or more family member migrated and then sent for other family members. Look for extended family and friends who may be traveling with your ancestor to help make sure you have the right family. Look at the list as a whole. What is the ethnic background of not only your person, but other passengers? What are their ages? Are they families? Are they mostly single men? Make sure that you look for maiden names for female ancestors. Check parent listings and notes at the end of some of the manifests for births and deaths on board. You might find a child who was born and died on the ship and there's no other record of that birth. Check multiple ports and bear in mind that your ancestor may have made several trips before finally settling in for good. Check newspapers around the time of the ship's arrival to see if there's information about the voyage. And keep in mind that records listing the date of immigration may have been created years after the event and may not be totally accurate. What you're looking for and how much information you may be able to retrieve also depends on the time frame for the immigration. There are three major time frames: before 1820, from 1820 to 1890, and from 1890 to 1957. We'll talk about each of these in a little bit of detail. Over 1 million immigrants came to the United States before 1820, but few names of passengers were recorded. There weren't any laws that required captains to maintain passenger lists that were also sometimes called manifests. In addition, many lists that were created have been lost or destroyed, and some few have been published and were saved. Many of the immigrants during this time frame were Catholic Irish, German, Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, Chinese, Japanese, and French Canadians. Other groups came at other times. To search for immigrants to the United States before 1820, you need to know at least your ancestor's full name, an approximate date of arrival in the U.S., and an approximate age on arrival. The best place to find pre-1820 lists is primarily hard copy, but some internet sources do exist. Prior to 1820, most ships coming to America didn't keep documentation of who was on board. Passengers were simply considered cargo, and many individuals traveled to their destination on uncomfortable rat-infested cargo ships. and sometimes only 5, 10, or maybe 30 passengers suffered through the trip together. Because of this, finding documentation of your ancestors' journey can be almost impossible. That's why Philby's Passenger and Immigration Lists Index, covering the years from 1500 to 1900, proves such an invaluable resource. Thousands of different records have been used to compile this index, everything from original passenger lists to personal diaries. BYU Library has 57 volumes of Philby's. A supplement is added yearly. We have the yearly supplements up to 2013. There are other hard copy indexes for immigrants arriving before 1820 and after on the religion and family history reference shelves. You can look for references for German, Irish, Italian, Dutch, and others. Don't forget other published books. Card catalogs are a good place to start. Look for references to immigration in biographical materials and local histories. Check libraries and archives near the port to learn more. And check the newspapers near the port as well. Sometimes they contain invaluable information. There are, of course, some good internet sources as well, particularly as you get closer to the 20th century. Make sure that you check Ancestry.com. Look under search and immigration for their information. The Family Search Wiki is also a good place to start. If you again search the wiki, get to the United States immigration records, and then United States immigration online records. Cindy's List is another good place to start. Look under ships and passenger lists, and she provides links to several other internet sites that have information on immigrant ships and passenger lists. Check ports of departure as well. See Find My Past to find passenger lists of ancestors leaving the UK between 1890 and 1960. After 1820, things get a whole lot better as far as finding good information about immigrants is concerned. Between 1820 and 1920, some 35 million immigrants arrived at U.S. ports, and 82% of those arrived at the Port of New York. This particular wave included many Italians, Polish, Austrian, Czech, Slavic, Yugoslavic, Romanian, Russian, Greek, Hungarian, Arab, Jews, and Japanese immigrants. Most of these people, until about 1892, arrived not at Ellis Island as we usually think, but at Castle Garden, which is located at the tip of New York's Manhattan. This was America's first official immigration center, and their database, which is kept up to date, has information on 10 million immigrants from 1830 through 1892, which is when Ellis Island was opened. Between 1820 and 1890, passenger lists came into existence. Most of these lists required submitting a list of passengers to the customs collector at the port of arrival, and they contain a lot more information than some of the early passenger lists do, even when they exist. These include a name, sex, occupation, country of origin, port of departure, date of arrival, name of ship, and other information that might be critical to your search. After 1890, passenger lists became much more expansive, as you can see from this slide. In 1891, the responsibility for them was transferred to the U.S. Office of Immigration, and you get a much more detailed view of the person who is immigrating. More than 22 million passengers and members of ships' crews entered the United States through Ellis Island and the Port of New York between 1892 and 1924. Information about each person was written down in ships' passenger lists, known as manifests, which were used to examine immigrants upon arrival in the United States. You are liable to find more information than you ever wanted to know about some of your immigrant ancestors. You can search these millions of manifests for information on individual Ellis Island passengers. New York wasn't always the leading port, even though it was established by the Dutch in 1625. It wasn't until the Erie Canal opened in 1825 that New York became the busiest port of entry. Over 80% of all immigrants arrived in America through Castle Garden and then Ellis Island. Here's a map showing some of the dozens of ports your ancestors may have come through on their voyage to America. You'll need to check the dates that these ports were in operation so that you'll know whether or not you need to look in records for those ports. Large numbers of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe prior to the 20th century prompted the Quota Act of 1921. This act limited the number of immigrants who could enter the U.S. Many immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe departed from Northern European ports to try to circumvent these measures. Coming in through Canada or Mexico was also a way to cross into the United States. Throughout much of history, travel to Canada from Europe was cheaper than it was to the U.S., so check those Canadian ports as well. You'll also want to check the border crossings for Canada and for Mexico for ancestors who entered the U.S. via these countries. Records are available for several European ports and contain similar information as those for inbound passengers. Finding your ancestors in these records will give you the ship name and allow you to estimate entry into the United States. There are many places to get excellent information about immigration and about some of the issues. Two of the more interesting ones that I located were Juliana Smith's Coming to America, Finding Your Immigrant Ancestors. This is posted on Ancestry.com. Her seminar was given in September of 2010, but it still includes excellent up-to-date information. Another source is The Changing Face of America. This is a PDF document that can be accessed through the Family Search Wiki under United States Immigration and Immigration. Both give you excellent information and background. Here are just a few of the entries on the Family Search Wiki. Again, as we said before, it's usually best to search these historical records than doing a general search. You'll also find many links from the Family History homepage here at the BYU Library. This is just a partial list of some of the things that you will find if you look up records and then immigration. And don't forget naturalization records in your search. Most people who were naturalized between 1790 and 1952 had to file a declaration of intention or a petition for naturalization. These are relative gold mines of information. They might even give you the name of the person's parents and the place of residence in the old country, which will lead you on a direct search across the waters. Once you've gathered your clues, it's time to take stock. Many of the experts suggest creating a timeline of family events and where they took place, birth dates and places of children, marriage dates, locations, and other details that can help you narrow your search. If your immigrant ancestors were in the U.S. and alive during the 1900, 1910, 20, and 30 federal censuses, check the column that lists the year of immigration to the U.S. Check state censuses for places your ancestors lived. Check the naturalization records. 20th century records in particular may list the ship, port, and date of arrival. Check for a U.S. passport, as these too may include immigration information. Vital records may include how many years in the U.S. And then seek out some of the unique collections like the records of the Immigration Savings Bank. All of these can be found both in Ancestry.com and in Family Search. There are a plethora of links in both places to all kinds of information. Use them to further your search. Whatever you do, don't leave them lost at sea. Happy searching.